Well, hello xenographers everywhere, and welcome to another episode. An f1.4 lens will give you plenty of blur in the back of your shot, and an f1.1 will deliver even more. But massive blur of this kind isn't right for every shot. So today we're going to look at 5 f2 lenses that will deliver a slightly more restrained form of the blurry stuff, but will still give a soft and lovely feel to a shot. So let's look at the first lens in today's collection, and that's the Minolta MD 50mm f2, and as far as I can tell, this example dates from the early 1980s. Shooting at its minimum focus distance of 45 centimeters, it makes, as you might expect, some very soft background blur. In fact, it's some of the softest and smoothest blur I've seen from a vintage lens. At longer subject to camera distances, that smoothness remains largely unchanged, and that's very unusual in a vintage lens. Usually you can expect to see, somewhere in the focal range, a fairly significant change in the nature of the background blur, which usually manifests as harshness or busyness, or, in some lenses, a bit of swirl. With this lens, however, the quality of the blur changes very little, and it's much more like a modern lens in this respect. Colours from Minolta lenses are generally known to be some of the nicest in the business, and this one's no exception, but colours are rendered very differently to those from the Minolta 50mm 1.4 we looked at a couple of weeks ago. Unlike that lens, colours from this one are muted and restrained with almost a pastel-y kind of feel. Very delicate, very soft and understated, quite beautiful in fact. It's a very sharp lens, and it's also fairly low in contrast, and these three elements, uniform softness of background blur, restrained colours and low contrast, all work together to produce a really soft, really delicate image that's quite beautiful and gives the lens a personality and a character all of its own, and a unique signature look. My only gripe with it, ironically, is the smoothness of the blur. For my taste, it's just a little too smooth. With vintage lenses, I actually like a few flaws, a busy spot or a bit of swirl. For me, that's part of their charm. You might think differently, of course, and there's no doubt that this lens will make some very beautiful images with a very unique character. As far as cost goes, expect to pay around £50 for a good one, perhaps a little less, and considering the quality of the image it makes, that's got to be really good value. Here's an f2 lens that's not an f2 lens. It's the Chinon 50mm, but at f1.9 I think it's close enough to join this group. It's a lens that was sold quite cheaply in its day, and undercut bigger name rivals by a considerable margin. I didn't expect particularly good results from this lens, but I was in for quite a surprise because this unpretentious piece of glass is really nice. It's very nicely made and engineered, and it's a very sharp lens with a lot of resolving power, as you can see from the level of detail in these images. It's got strong contrast too. Images are bold with plenty of presence, and colours are bold too. The lens is on the cool side, which personally I quite like, and contrast and colour work together to make images that have plenty of pop. Blur is very nice too. It's soft and smooth, creamy and lovely, and it compares well to the other more expensive lenses in this test. It's very smooth at the minimum focus distance of 45 centimeters, and it remains smooth almost right throughout the focal range, and the quality of the blur compares very well with other more expensive lenses. Point light sources give the usual vintage lens feature of central circles that become ellipses towards the edges, and there seems to be just a hint of swirl from it too, although probably not enough to satisfy fans of the swirly stuff. I'm very impressed with this little lens, and I think it's a bit of an unsung gem. It's sharp, it's contrasty, it's got great colours, and background blur is nice too. It stands up very well against the competition, all of which cost a great deal more than this lens, which, at around £20 for a good one, makes it a quite incredible bargain. Next we have the Zeiss Jena Pancolar 50mm f1.8. Again, it's slightly wider than f2, but it's near enough to make no odds. This is quite a cult lens these days, and with good reason. It's very sharp, it's very contrasty, it's got great colour rendition and some lovely background blur. It focuses down to 35 centimeters, and at that distance it offers blur in abundance, and it's of a very soft, very nice quality. It's creamy and dreamy and wonderful. Any clutter in the background just melts away, and all we see is the subject, and the lens's inherent sharpness and contrasty nature give that subject some real pop. With longer subject to camera distances, blur decreases, but even so, there's still enough to give some separation up to about 8 feet or so. But there is a point where it becomes a little bit jittery and nervous, so it's not smooth all the way with this one. It's easy to shoot around though, and for the most part, blur from this lens is soft and sweet and lovely. If you're a fan of the swirly stuff, this lens won't disappoint. Like a lot of vintage lenses, point light sources are elliptical towards the edges, and on this one they merge into each other to give the swirly background effect. It's a restrained swirl though, and it's not quite so wild as other better known swirlers like the Helios 44 for example. It's not quite so in your face or loud, and personally I think it gives images a lovely character. If you like your images sharp, this lens certainly won't disappoint. It's very sharp and it resolves loads of fine detail. In fact, I think this is one of the sharpest vintage lenses I've used. Like other Zeiss Jena lenses, it renders colours beautifully. They're rich, vivid and punchy with loads of depth, and I find the colour signature of this lens to be quite unique. Colours really jump out at you. Saturation is strong but not too strong, with just enough pop to give the lens a character all of its own. I must admit, this is one of my favourite lenses. It has an indefinable something that I think gives images a little bit of magic, and its good reputation is well deserved. In terms of cost, a good copy will cost around £100 or so. One that needs cleaning can be had probably for around £40 to £50, and on this lens that's fairly easy to do. A very nice little lens and a great addition to any photographer's kit. Finally in today's lineup, we've got the Leica Summicron 50mm f2, a beautifully engineered lens from the late 1950s for rangefinder cameras. This lens has a unique character and a look that I've not seen from any other lens. Because it's a rangefinder lens, its minimum focus distance is 3 feet or 1 meter, and because blur is in part dependent on distance and falls off as you move away from the subject, it doesn't make the kind of mega blur that a closer focusing lens can make. Nevertheless, it does make some beautifully soft blurry stuff, and that blur has a very unique character. It's soft and smooth and creamy if you're shooting close, but the blur isn't overwhelming. Forms and shapes don't disappear completely. They're still recognizable, but transformed into soft and squidgy versions of themselves, which gives a beautiful feel to an image and a softness that I really like. At longer subject to camera distances, blur gradually falls away, but it remains smooth and doesn't seem to become too harsh or jarring at any point. Point light sources are circular in the centre and elliptical towards the edges, and under the right conditions these ellipses do bleed into each other and create some swirl. Again though, it's a rather nicer swirl than that made by other well-known swirlers like the Helios 44. It's less coarse, less harsh. Somehow it's a little more magical. Just beautiful. I love the colours from this lens. They're slightly on the warm side and they're quite saturated too, but not overly so. Just enough to give a bit of sparkle, a bit of magic to any image it makes. This is a beautiful lens, but as with all things Leica, it comes at a premium price. Expect to pay around £250 for a good example. It's not cheap for a vintage 50mm f2, but the images it makes are so nice and so special that, in my opinion, it's well worth it. So there we are, 4 lovely little lenses that will give you some beautifully soft background blur, but won't overwhelm you with it. They all have a unique and interesting character, and they'll all put their own individual stamp on any image they make. So that's it from me for now. Don't forget to like, subscribe and ring the bell before you go, and if you like this channel, please consider supporting it on patreon.com/Zenography. As ever, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time for some more Zenography.